As we dive into this last topic of clinical decision making and kind of putting it together, we'll find that when you have to think and react fast, in the beginning, it can be very challenging. And this is where we're all working up can pay off in the long run and building those foundations and learning how each trend maps out and learning to adapt and doing all these things can make you that calm, collected, and precise person for your patient in those moments. And the key components to decision making, we've already covered, like analytical thinking, preparation, reflection, problem solving. And yet, to put it all together, we now have to talk about the last three, which is active listening, visualization, and prioritizing your care, and how that is important during those critical moments. So let's start discussing active listening and its significance in the clinical decision-making process. And then we'll go into the prioritizing care. And lastly, we'll explore visualization and how that can really be the key point to your virtual experiences that you add in with your real life ones. So the key components to active listening, the first one here is just to don't say anything. To be an active listener, you can't talk over somebody. You can't be thinking about something else. You have to be attentive to those moments and actually listen for what's being said, listen to what's happening in the room, listen to everything that's happening in between. Don't let your mind wander. Be engaged in that moment. And then listen again for those, like I said, trends of things that are happening. Listen for those alarms. Listen for, does anything need further clarification? Or do you need someone to repeat what they said? And we'll get into the communication here in the next lesson. But this adds context. Does what you're hearing match what you're seeing? If the words seem to contradict what's going on, take the time, even if it's a couple seconds or a minute or something, to understand why that there's a difference there. On average, it's predicted or studied or researched or whatever you want to say this, about 12,000 words are said every day, but there's only 750 actual words of meaning. There's a lot of fluff out there, and this is why you need to actively listen and process and review and decide what is important. Now, when you're in these critical moments, when everything's loud, people are talking over each other, how do you hear what you need to hear? And that's where, when you're actively listening to everything that's going on, you can become an even like more crucial portion or person in that room, because you understand and are making the clinical decisions quickly just because you're actually listening to what's going on. And this is where I've spent a lot of time teaching my students and my preceptees in the past. Is like, when you actually listen and you're actively listening in those code situations, you'll be able to hear things that just go over other people's heads just because of the fact that it is so loud and is so busy and chaotic in those rooms, that we need people in those rooms that are doing this skill. And as we move into the next portion here, the visualization, this is where you can actually bridge the gap of what you've actually experienced and what you're learning, to be able to actually have the good preparation for these type of events. No one's going to have the real life experience of every type of scenario unless they've been doing this job for 50 years. And for most of us who are starting out and who are worried, not worried, but like just cognizant of the fact that we don't have the necessary experience all the time for the patients that we're taking care of, this is how we become better for our patients. So you put yourself in those situations, you think through what's going to happen, what's going to cause this patient to code later on today or shortly or not at all. Like, what are the steps that are going to be taken? What's going to happen and the trends that I should look out for to get there. And this is why you're putting it together. And this can be a challenge if you've never experienced a situation. But the better you get at visualizing how things will go through this process and how your patients will tend to get to a certain result, it'll be easier to get over those hurdles, and you break them down into the segments. So you start your day for the first 4 hours. What are the trends I'm going to be seeing for this patient? The next 4 hours, what's going to be happening? If they code, this is what I'm going to do. And you put yourself in those situations, and you actually generally and take the time to think through this. Now, there is a power to visualization. And I learned this when I got my first master's degree in clinical physiology. We had a class. It was an elective that I took that was sports psychology, because I thought it might be interesting to find out like what is sports psychology. And there was this one example that the professor talked about, and there was an inmate in the 60s who went to jail and had this life-changing moment. He was like, I want to change my life for the better, and he had to endure the days in prison somehow. So he decided he wanted to take up golf. He never golfed before, and I mean, inmates don't have an intramural league or anything there, the chance to go play golf, but he did have access to a library. And what he did was he found the books on golf. He started reading about it. He started um, thinking about how he was going to play his hometown course. So he was able to get the layout of the course of where he was going to go play golf in his hometown when he was released. And every day he imagined himself playing that course. He imagined himself hitting the balls into the bunker, to the rough, or down the fairway, and imagined playing all of those holes throughout the course. And what happened was that when he went to go play in real life, since he had already laid that foundation, he ended up shooting par. Now, is this story true or not? But the fact is that is the power of visualization. And when we get into the last portion here of prioritizing your care, there is something to be said about the 2 E's here: effective and efficient. Am I currently performing a task that is essential for the patient's well-being, or is there something more urgent that needs my attention? Now, this can be challenging in a code or a rap response situation, but is what you're doing effective for what your patient needs? And being efficient is not just about speed, but rather efficiency. And I hate using a word to define a word, but it's important to avoid unnecessary movements, the thought processes, and the words that to save the time when dealing with patients who need our help when there's not much time to spare. And it may be that in those first times that you go through it, you may not feel as efficient, but that's where reflecting and thinking about and going back over how you did things and analyzing how you're going to go through that process helps you become better and more efficient and more effective during that. And this is how you work it into your clinical practice. Whether you're dealing with an emergency situation or going through your normal shift routine, think about and analyze those 2 E's throughout it. And when you reach that rock star level, in order to get there, that level of productivity, it is essential to incorporate this into the habit of constantly evaluating whether what you're performing is doing an effective and efficient way. Is the process efficient? Are the thoughts that I'm having and my process and my critical analysis and all these things, is it effective and efficient? And if it's not, think about it, reflect, make those changes to make yourself better. And you can do this through visualization and through actual real life experience. You could do them both, and that's going to be what you unlock to make yourself better. Now, when it comes to making important clinical decisions, there are a few key skills that are absolutely essential. First and foremost, active listening is crucial. Additionally, being able to visualize those scenarios and those different outcomes allows you to have that reflection and that ability to predict, not just predict, but be able to be ready for those unknown and complex situations. But practicing it, putting it into practice, figuring out if those 2 E's are working or not, that allows you to build that confidence and that adaptability that ultimately lead to better outcomes for your patient. Now, in our next lesson, we're going to be talking about the communication collaboration in these code events.